Now at this time I'd like to introduce Shawn Hawkins. He's the volunteer project manager for the BC211 case center. Shawn?
Yeah, I need the mic.
Okay. Eli, I need a time check. It's what, 6:35 now?
I'm going to throw that clock right up. Absolutely.
So how long do I have?
You have got 50 minutes.
5-0?
5-0.
Okay. If it gets boring, you guys, you can cut me short. Test, test. That work? All right. Recording going okay?
Yep.
This is new, by the way. They're trying it out tonight, and I'm new to this space.
We need a project manager for this.
Yeah, this is a neat space. I quite liked it when I came in, and I have some skills that I'm going to try to share with you tonight as well. So I'm going to talk about this BC211. As Don said, Myrna Pullman, who's the executive director of BC211, is here. But their office is right across the street in the Woodwards building. It's very convenient, and she didn't even know it existed. So this is a discovery night. Both. So this is a bit of a discovery for all of us. Yes? Good. I give Myrna full opportunity. If I say anything that you disagree with or you want to add some context, you jump out. Okay? The one thing I would like to do is find out a little bit about you. And I'm going to tailor my presentation a little bit to your interests. So hands up in terms of the representative groups. Don?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. How many of you work on internal project teams? The greats of the world. You're developing software in one way or another. Okay? How many work in companies that are your client-facing? You actually have that role of interacting with the client and making sure that the product, the software, whatever, meets their needs. Okay? That's a good spread. How about you work in client companies on the receiving end? So you're not on the IT side, you're receiving from an IT company. Okay? Well, this is cool. How many of you work in project management roles and know everything already? Any other groups? Did I miss anything? Yeah?
I just don't know everything.
Oh, it's just project. That's good. Then you can correct me too. So that's good because it's a pretty good spread around the table. One of the things I'm going to do, this was a big project. And there are lots of complexities and different factors that I can talk about. I picked 4 that stand out because they were very core to this particular project and because they're relevant to other projects in the IT field. So that it may have some opportunity for you. I'm going to push each of you at your tables to answer some questions as we go forward. So I like the fact that it's spread out. So let me tell you something about 211. Very simple explanation. You all know what 911 is. If you have to go for fire, police, ambulance, you pick up the phone and you dial 911. You don't have to know the individual numbers or contacts for any of those groups. One of the problems with 911 is a lot of the calls they get are not for police, fire, or ambulance. So think about the demographics, the social networks in our province. There are literally hundreds of organizations and groups that provide services to people in all manner of things. It could be people looking for shelter. It could be kids who are being bullied. It could be a gambler's hotline. It could be someone who's being battered or beaten. People looking for shelter for the night. I mean, there are so many different needs that people have. And there are literally hundreds of nonprofit organizations and government organizations scattered around the province. But unless you know they're there, and what their name is, and what their phone number is, how do you connect them? And it was out of that dilemma that the idea of 211 came along. It's sponsored by United Way. It's national. But in BC, they have been very supportive of the endeavors that Myrna has been leading here. So that it's still only working in a number of municipalities. It is spreading around the whole province as it rolls out. All you have to know is to dial BC, not BC, you dial 211. And you connect to a 24/7 call center. They have multi-language capabilities, they have trained people on the lines, and they will help. That's what it's all about. Now, put yourself in my boots. I was unfamiliar with BC211. I'd never heard of it when I started on this project. I didn't know the people. I'm not an IT guy. I'm the first to admit I don't know how to do any programming. I have enough trouble getting my TV to work properly. I'm not familiar with the IMS, the Information Management System software that was at the heart of the project. I'd never heard of that and didn't know how it worked. And I was a new face in an established organization. I was coming in off the street. So that was my starting. Now, scattered around your tables, you have a project description, a summary sheet. I hope that you all had a chance to have a look at that, because that was the core information that I was giving at the start of this project. Project sheet was very useful for a number of reasons. Number one, it was used to recruit a project manager. And it was a recruitment exercise. I think Don referenced that there are many project managers who have the certification, have some training, who are interested in volunteering. And in this case, there were a number of different applicants, and we interviewed, just as if we were interviewing for a job. Secondly, it is about communications. It provided that concise communication base to start the project. And it's amazing to me how often it's challenging for organizations to actually write down on paper what their project is about, what it's trying to accomplish. And I was involved in one major project, not this one, several years ago, where it took about 8 or 9 months to complete the project. It took 6 months to agree on a 1-paragraph description of what the project was at the executive level. That particular one had to be board sanctioned. It was really hard to do those basics. So communication is really important. And it's a reference point because inevitably in projects, you're challenged with scope. What's in scope, what's out of scope. The project summary sheet gave a starting point, at least. Didn't have to be definitive, but it gave you a starting point for the thing. So, look at that project summary sheet, if you will. And you'll see a number of different things. Scope of work was pretty clearly laid out. Talked about the strategic plan, stakeholder plan, scheduling, training, resources, budget requirements, coaching, and templates, and implementation. These are all terms that are very familiar to anyone working on projects. There's nothing unique about that. On the deliverables, okay, the written assessment of their current plan, strategic plan, and scheduling, risk analysis, again, implementation. And the time commitment estimate was 50 to 70 hours over 4 months.
That was so dumb.
Does anything there seem out of the ordinary to you on paper? Any red flags in what it said? I didn't think so. I thought it was pretty good. my initial reading, this was a pretty straightforward project. But I figured I better ask some questions. If I don't know, I kept asking. So I made up a list of questions, and in my first meeting with Myrna, we sat down and I went through my list of questions. So, based on the information that you have there in the sheet, and knowing my background, I was new to the organization and not an IT guy, what questions would you ask? So that's the first question for you to discuss at your tables. We'll give you a couple minutes at it. Do we have a timer ready to go, Eli?
We do. How much time would you like, sir?
5 minutes.
5 minutes it is.
To talk with the other people at your table, I'm going to wander around and plug in. What questions would you ask the executive director if you were the new project manager? You can write it down too.
I'm very waiting because I see a space between you and the face. It makes me think that about technology and they're already estimating how long it's going to take to deliver it. You've got non-technology people saying how long it's going to take to build a technology solution. So this is my solution. What kind of staff do they have? My question, my first question was what kind of staff do they have? I guess that would be a question that I was asking. But is it not an art? I don't know. I thought it was already established, so I didn't think it was changing that.
Well, I thought this was essentially the job. Saying this is what we're going to
And those are initially for 3. So I guess my first question, why wasn't the previous system being touched?
maybe if they have project managers making this, the English should they would have done it better.
Well, the strategic plan is what the project manager is going to do, right? So the project manager will need to create a strategic plan, takes into account the focus areas, stakeholder plan, schedule, training, resources.
And that creates the entire project plan and then manages.
Using that information, the project manager will create a comprehensive project plan that you can put into action. Once the plan is created, it will follow coaching and templates. So it's really just a strategic plan to be drawn out.
It looks like they have this part is part of their overall.
One more
Where is
minute.
this?
And this paragraph is part of So what's a beautiful issue?
Well, so they've got 4 months to do this. And they need it from all other people. So when, I mean, so 4 months to help.
Okay, wrap it up.
Well, that was the one thing that was the red flag. It was 50 to 70 hours over 4 months. That's not a lot of
Okay, so I'm going to go table to table. I want each table to give me one question. What would be your burning question? Okay, got one in mind? Okay,
How
start
did they
here.
come up with the number of 50 to 70 hours?
How did they come up with the 50 to 70 hours?
Because that's what you're interested in.
I was drunk.
Did I say we had some wine?
I've got one. How is this confidential if they're tracking all the call data?
Good question. The confidentiality of personal data. One question.
How are you able to find the keys that are not being made? Like, how do we know which keys are made and not being made? And then what needs to be made?
That's right, because it says needs aren't being met, but it doesn't say what they are. Yeah. How about this table? One question. Okay. Well, they're starting at Eli. You had a question.
Sure, so, it says things aren't working right now. I'm wondering, so what isn't working?
Yes, that would help. Okay, one question, Dave. Okay.
Yeah, if you already have the data.
Do we already have software? Good one. One question.
Where did it say what 57 hours
Okay.
Also,
How many people involved? Any other questions? So the point is there were a lot of things unanswered. And that's why it's so important to go into those meetings with a whole list of questions ready to go. So let me tell you what happened. Right away, the executive director, Myrna, took off the table the strategic plan. And what she said was that it had already been workshopped, they already had a strategic plan and was going to the board for approval. So I didn't have to worry about the strategic plan. I hadn't seen it, but I didn't have to worry about it. Now, I gotta tell you that that was a little unsettling for me because I really like strategy. I'm keen on strategy stuff. I've been doing it for a lot of years, and I really enjoy helping development and implementation of strategy. So that was a challenge for me. And based on my questions, it seemed to me that that time frame was completely unrealistic. I really didn't see how I could accomplish, or the project could accomplish, what was anticipated in that kind of time frame. So I looked at the implementation. This is, and I appreciate that the software, they had an existing software. It had been developed in-house. So it was their legacy system. It just didn't have the capacity to deal with the volume and the expansion that they were asking. So they were tendering out and bought an off-the-shelf product by a company in the United States that specialized in that area, an information management program for that kind of service that they were operating. It did have one key customized component that had to be built for it, and that was around faceted search. Search through on your database to find a particular organization. So let me explain that a little bit to you, because if somebody calls in and they're calling from Coquitlam and they're looking for shelter, the person on the receiving end is logging data on this computer screen based on the software that we're buying. And they have to pull up a directory of all the services in that area that provide that kind of service. Now, Some of you who lived in BC or have worked with nonprofits may be familiar with what's called the Red Book. It's been around for a long time. That Red Book was the directory of organizations that provided services, and part of this project was putting it online. So it's a big database. All right, so there was a lot that had to happen. So the executive director takes the strategic plan off the table, and I'm convinced from the questions and answers in that initial meeting that the time frame is unrealistic. Now what would you do? Put yourself in my boots. What would you do? Or what would you say?
Find a very subtle way of saying it.
Okay. Any other? Run? Well, what we agreed to, what actually happened, was I agreed to review all the information, and we would re-meet in a week. And I'd come back in that week with an outline of my best guess as to what was going to be required for this project in terms of timeline, resources. I took an approach that blocked it out, and I said, there's 4 phases to the project. And this is pretty standard for all project management. There's an initiation phase, when things get started. When you're looking at some of the original assumptions, some of the options, and you get a handle on what you have and what you need and how you think you're going to get there. That's the initiation phase. Second phase is the identification phase. That's when you got to nail down some of your funding, your resources, you got to verify the options, you got to confirm the approach that you're going to take in order to accomplish the project, and you've got to think about what are the key tasks and timelines going to be. That's stage 2, identification. Stage 3 is definition. That's taking that information and really trying to nail it down to something that you can actually budget, that you can actually put on a spreadsheet. You can do some step-by-step approach in how you're going to go through the project. Or you do some initial design thinking, depending on what that project is. And then the 4th phase, the last phase, is actually the implementation. That's when you have to do the training. You have to set your go live. You do the installation and testing up. That's all on the implementation, and you close it off with a project completion report. So my best guess on this project was we were past the initiation phase, but we haven't completed the identification yet. I figured roughly it's going to take 2 to 3 months on each phase of this project, based on the information I had at that time. I also figured I had to let go of the strategic plan. As much as I missed it, it was a done deal. And I would simply be intruding at that point. By letting go of it, I knew I could focus on the implementation of the information management system. And that's what they needed. And after all, I was a volunteer to help them accomplish a big task. So that's what actually happened. So, we're going to move on to the assessment phase. So appreciate that BC211 is a unionized environment. They got 30 to 40 employees, and they have divided into functional areas. So there are a number of key areas for this particular project. The Information and Referral, the INR group. These are the people who are really manning the call center. They're sitting at the screens, they're there 24/7, these are trained, dedicated people who've had all kinds of exposure to dealing with calls, and sometimes in very trying circumstances, very troubling circumstances. They have to take down all of the basic tombstone data. fill it on the sheet, identify a resource that can help that individual on whatever their need is, pass on that information, and maybe even do a follow-up later to make sure a connection is made. Most of the employees work in that area. Second group is research and publication. They have two key functions. One is maintaining the database of the resources available. I talked about the red book. That's big. And as you can imagine, a lot of small organizations are not particularly organized to give updates. If their phone number changes, if their address changes, if the service they offer changes, if the hours of operation change. So that constantly has to be updated. It's a time-consuming, detailed task. It has to be done right because you're referring people for help. The publication side of it is really very key and very interesting, and it's very strategic because for the first time there's this data that is being built up in terms of where real needs in society are. What those needs are, where they are, how people are being directed. And if you're a funding agency, United Way, or you're a provincial government department and you've only got so much money to spread around, it's really hard to make those decisions. You've got lots of small organizations kind of holding information close to their chest because they think that's going to protect them. So that all they have to do is go back year after year with their hands out and say, we've done a good job, give me more. But the reality in social needs is that it's harder and harder to get the money. So the funders really want some information upon which they can base their decisions on where their emphasis will be, where the dollars will flow. So it's a key for public policy. There are other parts of the organization that have an involvement. They have a manager of operations for finance and HR, resources, IT. The referral specialists are the people who are actually on the phones. So, the manager of R&P, research and publication, he was the person who had been most involved in the early stages of the project, other than Myrna, other than the executive director. He'd had a lot of the contacts, written it up, done a bunch of the research on it, and he was the key individual. So, on the very first day, I was told he's leaving in 10 days. What would you do? He's the key guy. He's got all the background on. What would you do at your table?
Like forever or for vacation?
He's gone.
Like
He's leaving the organization.
Okay.
Yep.
That would be fine.
You gotta do knowledge transfer. Yeah, that's the first step.
So, can we agree on?
Oh yeah, yeah. Knowledge transfer. In terms of actually trying to implement something with his assistants.
No, I was so, but I've done too many
Okay, wrap up your conversation. Yeah. So I asked a couple of people if similar circumstances have they ever encountered in their own careers, and I got nods. So I was lucky. I was very lucky because the culture at BC211 is a very positive culture. They really cared about the tasks and the job they were doing and the people they were helping to serve, and they cared about each other. And this particular individual was a very conscientious guy. And even though it was a stressful time, and there wasn't a replacement ready to come in who was transferring everything to, he took the time, and we did meet. And he filled me up with information about the legacy system, and the genesis of the project, and some of his ideas for where he thought it should go. So that was very useful, very useful. If that had not been the case, if he was closed-minded or was just gone the next day off to another career, I'd have to take a different course. I would have tried to piece together as much as I could from the information, the written information that was left behind. I'd have to interview people who had been otherwise peripherally involved and try to piece it together. The hard part is to try to conclude what's important from what isn't. And that is a PM task, a project management task. What's key, important information from everything else that you can just slough off? Also, this is a part of risk screening. You gotta have the experience or the sensitivity to know what might blow up in the future, what you really had to pay attention to. So now I'm going to move on to the project management role. Because appreciate, there are many different types of project management situations. And there's very different training for project management. So in the IT field, many of you are probably familiar with Agile. It's a big program, some nods there. I'm certified from the Project Management Institute, with project management professional. So this is an interesting organization. There's another group, by the way, in Europe that is doing their own thing. Lots of common elements between all three. The biggest one in North America, clearly, is project management professionals, the PMI organization. But on the IT side, it's about equal with PMP and Agile. PMI in the States really grew out of the engineering field. And big projects, building dams and hydro lines and skyscraper buildings and big factories. That's where it came from. That's where it started. And you got to give the Americans credit. They take an idea and they trumpet it to the hills. And they have developed PMI to such an extent it's got more bells and whistles than you could ever imagine. There's more training that you have to do and more exams and certification processes to get a ticket on this than you would imagine possible. And it covers a spectrum of projects from A to Z, very broad. It reminds me of De Beers with their diamonds. I mean, they're just taking a basic rock that comes out of the ground, but they have built such an image out of it and such a demand in the marketplace that it's been very profitable. Well, PMI has grown tremendously over the last decade, and it is a very profitable group in the United States. A lot of the projects that certainly I've been involved in, anything that had to do with IT or a small organization. I got to tell you that the Project Management Institute standards are sometimes a hard fit. We'll talk about that a little bit. But the role for the project manager that they articulate is very clear. It's like a small business where it's a sole proprietorship, and you just draw it for a second. You know, if you own a small business, you've got it set up so that everyone reports to you. You're the controller of all the information. All the inputs come to you. You make the decisions, and you give directions to everyone else. And in simple terms, that's the conception that PMI has for project managers. They are the dictators of the project. Another model is to take it more on an organization basis, where you've got a more structured environment, where you have different leads, people who have different responsibilities, and as the project manager, you act as the coordinator, the facilitator, the guide. That way you bring up a skill level, but you're not trying to carry everything on your own shoulders. You're relying on the expertise and the talent of others. Well, there's a broad spectrum. As a central player in project management at the top, I was offered an office at BC211. I could have moved into that office. I could have been there full time. I could have sat at the computer and done the project timetables and the spreadsheets and had everyone reporting into me on a regular basis to try to lead that effort. That was one option I had. I could have been an insider, highly visible, spend a lot of time in the BC211 offices, but I could have been more of a steerage person, coordinator. Or I could have gone one step further and been an advisor, more of a guide, a mentor, holding the reins lightly, for those of you who are familiar with riding horses. So I had to decide which of those, where along that spectrum would work for this particular organization. Based on what you know, it's a small group, 30 to 40 people. I already told you, they know each other. They've worked with each other and around each other for a long time. I was the outsider. What would your advice be? If you were taking on the project management role, what would you want to do? You said, Paul?
Personally, I would want to be the insider, but obviously it sounds like a challenge with the time that you have. Are you able to get the culture?
Yeah.
And it may not be the appropriate way to do it, depending on how they work. You may need to be more of an advisor. I don't know. That first option sounded like the worst one. It sounded like the way you described it, you're putting yourself in an office and you're putting yourself above and separating yourself.
Anyone else? Yeah.
I guess
Is
it
it
depends on
Leon?
yeah, on what the needs are and how fast you need. I mean, you have to consider sometimes how fast you need it to be done, and also, I mean, you didn't mention anything about the strategic plan, but I imagine also there might be a sense of feel of the organization as a whole and what would benefit them on that end. So maybe if one of those goals is to become sustainable, more independent, then you want to be more of an advisor. So or maybe more of an insider rather than a central. But that would depend on that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think I agree with a lot of what you said. And in fact, the course, what actually happened was I stayed very much on that end of the scale. And my rationale was, in some ways, this is my belief, project management is actually a misnomer. Because it's not fundamentally about the project, it's about people. And this is a small group that have an inherent culture. It was a very good, a very positive culture. But it was something that I was coming in, I'd be there for a short period of time. We put in this new information management system, and then I'd be gone. They had to live with it. They had to work with it. So I stayed at the light touch end of it. What I did was I brought in some tools. I brought in MS Project. So the 2010 version, I'm not a big fan of MS Project, but 2010 is not bad. And at least you can slim it down so that you can take out some of the basic components and apply it to a smaller project. Particularly a project because I wanted, if I was going to write the project plan, I wanted it accessible to all the lead people on the team. They had to be able to read it and understand it. I did a high-level project plan, and I put in the dates and tasks and accountabilities and links, and we kept updating that, version after version after version, and sharing it around so everyone could track what we were doing. We had weekly meetings in person around the table. Spend an hour to 2 hours talking about different steps or key issues that were coming up in the project so that everyone could hear it. There were a few people that were there all the time, other people who came and went depending on the subject that was the key focus. We also had weekly conference calls. This is one element of the project I didn't explain fully earlier, but there was a sister organization in Ontario, Ontario 211, that we were partnering with. And both the 211 organizations had purchased the same information management system software from the same source and were moving forward to implement it. So we were coordinating between the two 211 organizations and the supplier, and that was a weekly conference call. What else did we do? I prepared a risk register. Are you all familiar with risk registers?
No.
Don't know what that is. Okay. There's nothing magic about it. Here's some of the things that were on the risk register. Number one, the software development is more complicated than anticipated.
Surprise.
Right? Surprise, surprise. So my table was, here's the description of what the risk was, the probability of the risk occurring on a scale of 0 to 1. I assessed that at 40%, 0.4. What would be the consequences of that happening? A couple of bullet points. What action could we take? Now, actions, when you're dealing with those kinds of risks, you want to either accept the risk, so you're in the game. You want to mitigate the risk, or you want to avoid or transfer the risk. You got 4 choices. You got to figure out what to do with it. You can't just identify it and leave it. And finally, on the risk register, who owns it? Who on the project team is responsible for dealing with that particular risk? Doesn't mean that they have to wear it for all time, but rather they're the person who has to think it through and bring it back to the table. Those are the different categories for a risk register. And then there was a change management. Change management is communications and consultation. The interesting thing about consultation and communications, you can communicate without having any consultation. We've all received notices from on high that say, attention, we have changed something. Big announcement. But you can't do consultation without communication. You've got to have it. Change management is one of those areas that I think organizations are particularly inept at accomplishing. And I really don't understand why, because there are some basic rules that can be followed to follow through on that change management to make it very effective. If we have time at the end, I'll talk about that a little bit. But let me tell you what actually happened. I met one-on-one with all the leads, and I did it in person, away from everyone else. I have found my experience is that is particularly useful because there are some things that people are just, they find awkward or they're unprepared to say in front of others. But they will, if they are committed, they want the project to succeed, or they want me to be informed as their project manager, they'll tell me. I have to weigh that information as it comes in. It's much better to have those conversations in private, one-on-one. I prepared initial critical success factors. How do we measure the success of this project? How are we going to know if it's successful or not? It's not just meet the objectives on time, on budget. Each project has specific objectives that have to be identified. And then you can track it, and you know whether you're meeting them. And in this case, we had both internal measures and external measures, because we were serving an external community. Had a T-minus timetable. Probably familiar with this. When it gets close to the time when you're actually going to launch or go live, or whatever terminology you use, I started back 2 months, 8 weeks. I said, okay, T-minus 8, what are the things that we have to make sure? How much has been completed? How much training has been completed? How much communication has been done? Are the systems up to speed? And T-minus 7, 6, 5, the closer and closer it got, it really created a focus for the team. And a parking lot. Parking lot was just that sheet, it's like a board that I could carry forward. Actually, I put it online for those things that came up during the discussion, which really were not in scope of the project. We were not going to be able to do it within the scope we had or the time we had. But we didn't want to lose the ideas. These are things that had to happen later. So we created that reference sheet, and that was really a comfort for a lot of people. People, in my experience, really feel strongly. They get really impassioned about ideas and things they care about, things that they think need to happen or should happen within any organization. Simply recognizing those and putting it down and giving some acknowledgement to it goes a long way in keeping those people enthused. And finally, the project completion report, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, last discussion. Go live. This was interesting. Something I'm sure none of you are familiar with. Repeated delays in terms of when we wanted to go live. Originally, it was April, May we wanted to go live. This is last year. But there were problems. We had some turnover in personnel, but more importantly, there were some key elements in the software that were either not fully addressed or not completed. Now, there were some elements, I think there was a belief that it could be handled in a very standard format. Standard format is you write it, you send it to the client, they check it, they evaluate it, they give you some feedback, you revise it, and then it's done. Didn't work. Didn't work. A few things, not bad. Other things went back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. We had to keep track of all of these elements to get closer and closer to completion. All these threads have to be brought together. There were complications with respect to the staff communications. you tell people, I mean, you are probably much more familiar than I am with the world of social media, the tweets and the blogs. You tell staff, you tell people that, okay, next week we're going to do something. And it doesn't happen next week. And it goes on several months. After a while, they're going to say, what's going on? What's really going on? So the delays were really impeding some of the communications. There was training issues because we had a legacy system. And we had people that were trained on it. So we wanted to train people on the new system. Well, we had to complete it first before we could train them on it. And then once it was completed or near completed, we wanted to train them, but as close to the go-live date as possible. Otherwise, they're going to forget it. Right? You don't train them and then go back to the old system for 2 months and then go live on the new one. Because you've lost them. They've forgotten. So there's a timing issue for training. There were vacations. We had people, we thought we were going to go live in the spring. So very conscientiously, people were booking their holidays for the end of summer, into the fall. Freaking, everything's cool by then. It wasn't. We had people who had paid money for family vacations in September. And we were crowding the date. And they were sitting there wondering, what do I do? And there were costs. There were some costs inherent in the existing system that kept running. The new system was going to cut out those costs entirely. It was going to reduce those costs. But the longer we went on, the more those carried costs were eating into the budget. Well, after months of planning, crunch time came in about a 24-hour window. There were some factors. I've talked about some of the momentum factors, and you may have experienced a situation where the program was not perfect yet, but it was good enough. We had to go for it. I got my 5-minute warning. There was some risk avoidance. There were a key member of the team who was leaving for another job. We really wanted him there when we went live. And our executive director had just returned from a business trip to the East Coast, and we had to sit down and say, here's what's happening now, we've got to make a decision. Well, the question was, how do you, as project manager, help the team make that go, no-go decision? What would you say or do to help them?
90% is done.
90% is done?
Never done.
Okay. Well, what actually happened? There was no burning platform. You're all familiar with the terminology burning platform? Comes from the oil field industry. You know what platforms are. You know what an oil drilling platform is. A burning platform is literal. If the platform is on fire, what's your escape? What do you have to do? You run out of options. You can't call for help. You got to do something. That's the terminology. We didn't have a burning platform. We didn't have to go at any particular time. There was no hard drivers. And to her great credit, Myrna was consistently throughout the project, did not put artificial deadlines on it. She said, we got to do the right thing. We got to do the right thing for the people who work here and the people we're serving. We'll go when they're ready to go. The deciding element became training. We had a new cohort of people coming in. We had to train them. We had staff schedules that were booked a month in advance. We had a window. We had done lots of preparation work. We picked a date. We knew the date of the week where the volume of calls was the least. We picked it, and we went for it. We had it all set up. We had a full plan just for the day of go live. Who was going to be where, what issues might arise, what the risks were, and how we would address it, and it went beautiful, smooth. So quiet that we sat around at noon and said, what happened? Maybe it's the problems are still coming, but they really didn't. It was a very successful launch. Now they're still working on the programs. They're still trying to increase the speed. There's, minor things, and it's still evolving. But it was a very successful launch. So, what do I want to share with you around best practices and learnings? Number one is the value of good sponsorship should never be underestimated. For those of you who are given project assignments, you know what a blessing it is to have a really clear sponsor, someone who is prepared to tell you the straight goods, make decisions, meet with you when you need to be met with. It's a pleasure. Number two, flexible project management wins hands down. I've seen so many projects go off the rails because they were very doctrinaire in their approach. The book says in chapter 3, you got to do it this way, and away you go. And it doesn't work that way. Simple does not equal easy. We started off half hour ago or 40 minutes ago looking at a project sheet and said, it's a pretty simple project. It's pretty straightforward. On paper, it looked good. But it was anything but easy. You had to be flexible going through. I think we have time. I wanted to show you a video clip. You have the squeaky wheel? As he brings that up, I'll go to the last one. Communications needs to be multidimensional. So most communications plans that I've seen have gone, we're going to make it. Go for it. Most communications plans do very simple things. They say, here's the key messages, here's our audience, here's how we're going to get it out. Here's the vehicle or the channel we're going to use. But they miss so much. Because the communications has to really capture people, not those who are just being internally affected, but also externally affected. You've got to, in the communications, you've got to cover off what we call the 4 Ps of change management. Familiar with the 4 Ps? You tell you. What's the big picture? What are the big drivers? What are the winds that are blowing that are causing us to want to do anything? What's wrong with where we are? Why do we have to do something different? That's the big picture.
Say it again. Jeez.
You go ahead on that.
Anything else? Excuse me, madam. This might do the trick.
Oh. At Caltex, our staff will do whatever they can. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
To help make your life a little easier. Caltex. Nice.
Don't assume in communications. And we also have time, I think, for the Coast Guard. For that? While he's doing that, I'll give you the 4 Ps. We talked about the big picture. The second is the purpose. What is going to be achieved by making this change? How's it going to be better than where we are? The third is the plan. How long is it going to take? Who's going to do it? How's it going to affect things? And the fourth is my part. How does it affect me? Or what are your expectations of me? How do I play a role in it? Those are the big 4 Ps when you get into change management. Okay.
Das hier ist mein Sektor. Das hier ist das wichtigste Gerät des Küstenwächters. Das Gerät und das Gerät. Überlebensradar.
Mayday, Mayday. Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
That goes to communications. What you say, what you think you're saying, may not be what's being received. So, there's our project in a nutshell. Do we have any time for questions?
We do.
Open the floor. Yeah. Better part of a year. From start to finish.
If you want to increase your project management skills and you don't have a lot of funds, what's the best way to do it?
Well, the Project Management Institute does charge.
Yeah, that's what
And there's training courses that charge even more than PMI does. And a volunteer organization like PMV doesn't have really the opportunity for people to get too involved who don't have the skills to be able to apply. But what there is are workshops that take place. There's a local chapter of the project management. There are workshops at Vantage Point, which is a non-profit organization. At the back?
Yeah, I did my project management class at Capilano in my undergrad, and anybody can apply there and have a CAPM now. It just gives you a good foundation.
Good. And that was, they charged just a regular course fee?
Yeah, regular course fees. And like a PMP did the course, so it's quite useful.
Yeah, the exam cost is not much if you can get the course in. So you can take just one course.
Yeah, just project management.
Okay, there's another option.
I took actually a series of workshops through pmvolunteers.org. You go to their website, click workshops. They don't have any new ones scheduled. It's a series of 4 workshops. And they had a bunch of great takeaway resources such as communication matrix or risk matrix or work breakdown structure. So some resources, they don't have to take a workshop, you can steal these things and use them.
There's templates right on their website. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And these workshops are actually focusing on nonprofit organizations as well, like yours.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Harry?
And it's only $100.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's $100 for 4 workshops. That's what we did that year.
Come on, they paid for food. I came ahead on this one.
That's great.